Since November of last year, 2024, Admiral Halsey has been performing his duties with high efficiency, according to testimonies from his colleagues in the U.S. Department of Defense, the Pentagon. He's the commander of the U.S. Southern Command, the division responsible for Central and South America, a critical role in regional security. However, just 2 weeks ago, his retirement was politely announced after he received his Form 6, marking one of the most surprising and serious resignations the U.S. military has seen in years. In early September, Admiral Halsey received direct orders from the Pentagon to begin targeting small boats coming from Venezuela. According to the official U.S. narrative, these boats were carrying drug shipments, some large enough to kill tens of thousands of Americans, as President Donald Trump stated. The operations targeted no fewer than 10 boats and resulted in at least 43 deaths, a significant and tragic outcome. But the admiral had strong objections to these sudden, unplanned military operations, which he believed were surrounded by serious legal and ethical questions. The tension between him and Defense Secretary Pete Hex grew until they had a verbal confrontation during a meeting, highlighting a deep disagreement. Shortly afterward, the admiral announced his resignation, a direct consequence of the escalating conflict. Since then, U.S. air and naval strikes have escalated in intensity, marking a significant shift in military posture. Over September and October, the Caribbean region has witnessed the largest U.S. military buildup in decades, involving dozens of warships, helicopters, drones, and fighter jets. This massive deployment also included soldiers and full aviation and maintenance crews, indicating a comprehensive and sustained military presence. Last Friday, the Pentagon announced it was moving the aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford, the largest and most advanced in the world, from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean. Right now, more than 10% of the entire U.S. Navy is deployed in that region, forming a fully equipped miniature army ready for action. But this army isn't targeting the entire region. Its focus is solely on Venezuela and its government, led by President Nicolas Maduro. Given the tense atmosphere, anyone watching might think of just one word: invasion. The implications are profound. A possible U.S. invasion of Venezuela, the country that holds the world's largest oil reserves, over 300 billion barrels. These reserves are enough to power the world for more than 8 years of continuous consumption, making them a geopolitical prize. So, is the U.S., under Trump's leadership, truly preparing for an invasion? This question looms large. And what's really behind this anti-drug campaign? Is it a genuine effort or a pretext for something more? Does Venezuela truly represent a major narcotics threat to the U.S.? The official narrative suggests so, but skepticism remains. Or is there another motive behind this massive buildup? Perhaps control of Venezuela's vast natural wealth, particularly its oil? That's part of what we'll explore together in today's episode, delving into the complexities of this geopolitical situation. The map shows U.S. forces currently stationed in the Caribbean. These deployments have taken shape over the past 2 months, from late August until now. Around 8 U.S. warships are positioned near Venezuela, with thousands of troops in Puerto Rico. They are supported by F-35 fighter jets, MQ-9 Reaper drones, surveillance aircraft, and full support teams. The Trump administration has promoted this as a military campaign against narcotics trafficking. U.S. military officials claim these missions are training exercises, not invasion rehearsals. In reality, Trump's administration treats Latin American drug traffickers like terrorist organizations. This is now the official doctrine of Trump's Pentagon, comparing drug cartels to groups like Al-Qaeda. Secretary of State Marco Rubio shares this same message. Trump regularly declares Venezuela's government, led by Nicolas Maduro, is central to drug trafficking. But is that true? Does Venezuela pose a major narcotics threat to the U.S.? The surprising answer is no. Venezuela has almost nothing to do with most drugs entering the U.S. Most cocaine comes from Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, the world's top 3 producers. Most cocaine is trafficked through the Pacific Ocean, with minimal routes near Venezuela. The Caribbean was a key smuggling zone decades ago, in the 1980s and 1990s. Venezuela plays no significant role in fentanyl production or distribution, the drug driving America's addiction crisis. Fentanyl is almost entirely manufactured in Mexico using chemicals from China and other Asian countries. This information is documented in reports from the DEA, Department of Justice, and Congressional Research Service. Analysts conclude the real objective behind this military buildup is regime change in Venezuela, not drug control. Former U.S. Ambassador James Story stated, "Using military power to destroy small drug boats is like using a welding torch to cook an egg." This overwhelming show of force isn't about narcotics. It's about removing the Maduro government. In late September, the New York Times reported that top Trump administration officials discussed escalating military pressure to force Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to resign. This campaign was driven by Marco Rubio, holding dual positions as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, supported by Defense Secretary Pete Hicks, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller. Rubio, a Cuban-American politician and former Republican senator from Florida, is a fierce U.S. opponent of the Maduro regime. He believes keeping Maduro in power strengthens Cuba's communist government, led by the Castro family and President Miguel Diaz-Canel. Many Florida voters, especially those of Cuban and Venezuelan descent, share this anti-Maduro sentiment. Since Trump's second term began in 2025, Rubio pursued two strategies: topple Maduro and consolidate influence within the administration. By September, Rubio's camp favored forcing Maduro out through internal destabilization, not a major ground invasion. Their plan was to sow divisions within Venezuela's ruling elite and military, a classic American playbook. However, the plan failed. Maduro's regime proved more resilient than U.S. intelligence predicted, despite economic hardship. There were no mass defections or quick fractures within his government or army. Former U.S. envoy Elliot Abrams admitted that recent U.S. military drug operations were actually a pressure campaign. These operations aimed to test Maduro's inner circle, hoping Venezuelan military officers would abandon him. The regime has endured, leading to the critical question: what does America really want from Venezuela? Is it democracy and drug trafficking, or oil and natural resources? The Trump administration's approach was maximum pressure with sanctions. Financial sanctions in 2017 restricted Venezuela and PDVSA from U.S. markets. In 2019, oil sanctions banned U.S. entities from Venezuelan oil. Elliot Abrams, special envoy for Venezuela, has a controversial history, including the Iran-Contra affair, signaling a hardline approach. The U.S. accused Maduro of leading a drug cartel, offering $15 million for his capture. Trump authorized CIA covert operations and strikes on suspected drug trafficking boats. These actions raised concerns about military intervention and international law, despite Maduro's government minimizing the threat. The Venezuelan crisis has led to a significant refugee crisis, with millions fleeing due to economic problems, food shortages, and violence. U.S. interests in Venezuela's vast hydrocarbon sector have also played a significant role. The U.S. historically imported Venezuelan oil and protected Venezuelan assets overseas, like the U.S. refiner Citgo. Marco Rubio's influence on Trump's Venezuela policy was significant, advocating for increased U.S. pressure to support the Democratic opposition. He also supported military intervention to remove Maduro, raising concerns about the legality and justification of U.S. actions. Some analysts believe the U.S. uses the drug narrative as a pretext to access Venezuela's oil and prevent other global players, like China, from gaining influence. The U.S. revoked licenses for Western companies to operate in Venezuela, aiming to pressure the Maduro regime. The situation remains tense, with potential for escalation. The U.S. approach has been criticized for lacking strategy, justifiable targets, and legal authorization. The destabilization of Venezuela could have negative regional consequences, including increased drug trafficking and migration. Despite challenges, some experts advocate for dialogue and negotiation to resolve the crisis, serving both U.S. interests and the Venezuelan people. Others argue for the full reimposition of sanctions to increase pressure on the Maduro regime and support the democratic opposition. Ultimately, the future of U.S.-Venezuela relations depends on a complex interplay of U.S. domestic politics, regional dynamics, and Venezuela's internal situation. America's renewed focus on Venezuela is clear: oil. This is despite public statements about democracy and fighting narcotics. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves globally, surpassing Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the United States. However, decades of corruption, sanctions, and mismanagement have crippled production, making Venezuela one of Latin America's poorest nations. For Washington, this presents both a problem and an opportunity. A pro-U.S. government in Caracas could grant direct access for American energy companies like ExxonMobil and Chevron. This would counterbalance OPEC and Russia in the global oil market and, crucially, undercut China's growing energy influence in Latin America. Since 2019, China and Russia have invested billions in Venezuela, funding oil operations, building infrastructure, and offering political protection. U.S. sanctions aim to collapse Venezuela's economy and Maduro's government. Instead, Caracas was pushed closer to Beijing and Moscow. Now, Washington is trying a new tactic, using military pressure and political negotiations for a transition, with potential direct resource agreements afterward. Secret meetings between Venezuelan and American envoys occurred this summer in the Dominican Republic and Mexico, as reported by Reuters and the Wall Street Journal. The message was simple: access to your oil might ease sanctions. Maduro, leveraging his position, offered limited deals to American companies while strengthening alliances with China through BRICS. A Venezuelan analyst summarized it: Maduro doesn't want to be invaded, he wants to be bought. Meanwhile, the Pentagon expands operations in Colombia, the Caribbean Sea, and Guyana, militarily surrounding Venezuela under the guise of anti-drug patrols. This raises questions. Is the U.S. preparing for regime change, or setting the stage for an oil bargain under pressure? Regardless, Venezuela has once again become the front line of a global energy war. As the U.S. tightens its grip on Latin America, the world's major powers are quietly redrawing their own maps of influence. China views Venezuela not just as a source of oil, but as a strategic foothold in the Western Hemisphere, right in America's backyard. Beijing has invested over $60 billion in infrastructure, energy, and mining projects across Venezuela since 2007, making it the country's largest creditor. Through BRICS+, China is helping Venezuela bypass the U.S. dollar system by trading oil in yuan and digital currencies, weakening Washington's control over global finance. Russia, for its part, has expanded its military cooperation with Caracas, providing defense systems, surveillance equipment, and cyber support. For Moscow, Venezuela is a reminder that the U.S. isn't untouchable, even in its own hemisphere. At the same time, Latin America is splitting into two camps. Countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico are pushing for economic independence in a multipolar world, while others, such as Colombia and Chile, continue to align closely with Washington. This division is fueling a new ideological Cold War across the region, one that mirrors the global rivalry between the U.S. and China. Meanwhile, inside Venezuela, ordinary citizens remain trapped in crisis. Inflation continues to soar. Power outages are routine. Oil production has dropped by nearly 70% since 2014. Yet, ironically, the poorer Venezuela becomes, the more strategically valuable it is to everyone else. Analysts warn that if tensions escalate, the Caribbean and northern South America could become the next global flashpoint, a region where energy, ideology, and geopolitics collide. So the real questions now are: will Washington risk another intervention in Latin America? Can China and Russia protect their ally without direct confrontation? And most importantly, are we witnessing the birth of a new global order, where oil, not democracy, decides alliances? The fight for Venezuela is about control of the 21st century. Venezuela, with the world's largest crude reserves, is a battleground for global influence. The United States aims to reassert influence in Venezuela's energy sector. Venezuela seeks closer ties to the BRICS alliance to reduce reliance on the U.S. dollar. The dollar's throne is shaking as nations explore alternative currencies. From Ottawa to Beijing, every power is choosing sides with energy, currency, and technology. Venezuela is the new chessboard. Its oil fields are the squares, and alliances are the moves. How far will the U.S. go to keep control? Once the dollar falls, the world economy changes, ushering in a new financial order. This is the story of a new era where nations rise by control of energy, money, and data. Stay tuned, because the next headline could mark the end of an empire.